Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Well, yes, it's exactly noon. People are still dialing in, so we're going to give it 2 more minutes and then we will go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. You are here with the Global Good Fund's business and executive community. We have a few more folks dialing in and we will get started momentarily. Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Danielle Crew, and I am the Director of Business Development for the Global Good Fund. I hope you are all doing well and staying safe. I want to thank you all for joining us for the final installment, part 3 of our B Community Conversation Series. These conversations were a part of a new launch for this community and really designed to showcase the talents and expertise of this network and the work of our entrepreneurs. In our first program, we looked at how small businesses can reopen safely. Our second program really took a look at the importance of impact investing and investing in underrepresented voices and communities. And today we're going to take an inside look at the Global Good Fund and how our entrepreneurs are working as effective change agents to address some of the world's most complex social problems and issues. What you can expect from today's program: you are going to hear a great conversation from one of our board members and one of our Global Good Fund alums, and which will be moderated by Wood Parker. The first half, he will be narrating or conducting this conversation, and then we're going to turn it over to the audience for your questions. And I know we're probably all sick of the Zooms right now, and I'm sure you all know how to do this, but just in case, if you look at the bottom corner of your screen, you're going to see a Q&A box. You're going to head over there, type in your questions, and when we get to that portion of the program, I'll be asking your question for you. And for those who were on our last program, I know we didn't have a chance to get to everything. That is okay. We will let you know how you can get in touch with our presenters today, and we'll make sure we follow up with those questions that we could not get to if we don't have time. So with that, I want to turn things over to Wood Parker, our BEC chair and moderator for today, who will introduce our speakers.
Thanks very much, Danielle, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. We've got two outstanding panelists to discuss entrepreneurs as change agents today. Rachel Watson is the co-founder and current CEO of Every Child Fed, an organization focused on empowering mothers with sustainable solutions to malnutrition. Rachel is also a current board member for the Global Good Fund. Welcome, Rachel. Tom McDougall is the founder of 4P Foods, a benefit corporation that works with over 100 local farms, delivering their sustainably produced food to customers in and around Washington, D.C. The goal is to use food as a tool to create a more equitable, socially just, and sustainable food system. Tom is also an alumni. He was a fellow of the Global Good Fund in 2017. Welcome, Tom. Before we get to our main topic today, let me ask both Rachel and Tom to tell us just a little bit more about yourselves, how you got here today, and in particular, how you first were connected with the Global Good Fund. Rachel, can we turn to you first?
Yes. All right. Well, thank you for having me, and good afternoon to everyone where it happens to be afternoon. I saw some folks joining from Sierra Leone. So hello to everyone that's across the world. Just a quick side note, in March, I was in Sierra Leone and had to come back to the US because of COVID. So have a special place in my heart for anyone in Sierra Leone right now, because that's where I wanted to be for much longer than I was able to. But quick background on me. Right now, I actually spend more of my time really as a social impact strategist. So working with both corporate organizations and nonprofit organizations on their impact strategies and what that can look like. And I came to the Global Good Fund in the early days. When it first got started, I worked with Carrie and Knox at Innova Health System. I was working as the community affairs executive, so working on community issues in the DC area. And my background is international development, working in Africa. And so I heard about what they were trying to build, and I just said, hey, this is my background, international stuff. If you need any help, let me know. So that was what, 2012, 2013, quite a few years ago. And I've been able to volunteer in a lot of different capacities, the first application process to now being on the board. So I just really enjoyed being a part of the organization from the start and seeing how it's grown. So it's really been an amazing experience. So excited to be here with this community and see the community continue to grow. So thank you. And thank you to everyone that's joining us today.
And Tom, how about you?
Yeah. Yes, camera on. I wasn't sure where to look there. Hi, everyone. Echoing Rachel. It's an honor to be here and to be chatting with all of you, especially those of you around the world. I too had a weird moment in March where I was not in Sierra Leone, but I was in New Orleans for a nerdy food hub conference, which is the space that I'm in, and the world began to shut down around us, and we had to get home as fast as we could. My work is in food systems, as Wood alluded to at the top of the call. I'm the founder of a company called 4P Foods. We're based in the Mid-Atlantic, primarily in Virginia. And our mission really is one of duality, where we are trying to create a marketplace for farmers and food producers that use sustainable and regenerative practices in a way that they can actually survive and ideally thrive, number one. And number two, build a model in a food system together with partners in the region such that good, healthy food that nourishes our body and our planet is equitably accessible to all people, regardless of income or race or zip code, because that is not currently the food system that we have. And I found my way to Global Good Fund because I sometimes identify as a social justice activist stuck inside of a skinny entrepreneur's body, like trying to use business as a force for complex positive social change is, I felt like a weirdo for a long time trying to do that. And then I met Carrie Rich at a place called Impact Hub, which was a space in place for mission-driven companies and organizations, and was humbled and honored to be part of Global Good Fund in 2017 as one of their fellows. And it was a 15-month journey that was arguably one of the best things I've ever done, both personally and professionally, because it helped me realize that not only was that way of thinking, of using business for positive change, not only was I not alone, but in fact, there's a lot of other people around the world deploying similar strategies, and they wanted to help. So here I am. Thank you.
Thanks very much, folks. Tom, let me stay with you for a moment. The subtitle of our discussion today is to look at how the Global Good Fund works to create sustainable social change. Now, you've been very vocal about your desire to create sustainable food systems. You talked a little bit about 4P Foods just a moment ago, but more specifically, how are you doing this through 4P Foods?
Sure. Yeah, it's in many ways we're simply trying to connect the unmet demand for good food, and when I say good, it's sort of this catch-all for ethically sourced, transparently sourced, sustainably and ideally regeneratively raised, The kind of food that those of us that think about when going to the farmer's market, like that's the kind of food and the type of food system they want to produce, that food exists. But the supply chain, the supply net to get it from where it is to where it needs to be in a way that's convenient, quick, accessible, affordable, doesn't exist. We, especially in the last 5 months, I think the world has seen that our industrialized global food system is made up of supply chains. And chains, in their truest definition, have a single point of breakage, and it's at the weakest link. And indeed they did break in these last 5 months, and it left tremendous amounts of food rotting in fields and tremendous amounts of families in need left hungry. The power of local, regional, human-centered food systems as an alternative to that is networks. And we think about food nets, like a cargo net or a fishing net instead of chains. There's multiple points of linkages and hubs and spokes where it creates this resiliency, this model of connectivity. And it's this theory of change that friends of ours at Farm Fair have elevated that I think really sort of speaks eloquently to how and why it can be done. There's this ever pursuit of profit in a world of free market capitalism that externalizes the real costs of, in my case, food, but also healthcare and the environment. And it's built on this principle of economies of scale for the sake of profit. We think there's a way to build sustainable, regenerative food systems that create healthier communities and fight climate change in the process through this alternative to economies of scale being economies of collaboration. How can we work with communities and organizations and people and actors through hubs and spokes through a network to build a better food system? So sustainable is one thing. Unfortunately, where climate change is going, if we just sustain where we're at in terms of our carbon outputs, it will be too late. So we really need to think about regenerative food systems and systems in general to really start to pull back some of the carbon that's out there. And in the meantime, feed a bunch of people good food.
Excellent. Well, we all need food, and we appreciate your efforts in that regard. Rachel, turning to you, in your professional work, as well as your role on the Global Good Fund board, you're dealing with some complex social issues. What are some strategies or actions that you have seen that have been particularly successful or effective in creating that lasting or sustainable social change?
Well, first of all, I have to say everything that Tom just said. So I think that the way that he is approaching it and the way that 4P Foods is approaching the issue of healthy foods is exactly the way to go to actually be sustainable and successful. And I usually think about it in terms of what is the understanding the ecosystem and who are all those players within that ecosystem. So for me, when I'm working in Africa and looking at, how are we addressing acute malnutrition, the work that Every Child Fed does is really supporting local production of a therapeutic food. So it's not just getting that food out, but the whole ecosystem that exists around that one, getting that one solution out. So I think that is perhaps maybe not the most important, but quite possibly the most important piece of it from what I've seen is really understanding the ecosystem. And I think sometimes there's a temptation to either have a great idea of a solution and then you go find the problem, which is not the way to approach it. And then sometimes you'll find that, there's this problem. And so you dive in deep to that one problem and not understand the full ecosystem that's affecting it. And I think that's a way that people can get moving in the wrong direction. So I think really looking at what is the full ecosystem that we're trying to move social change within, I think is key. I think the other thing is, and this is from thinking about an international development perspective, but thinking about having a participatory approach. And that goes to, again, what Tom was saying about what is that full network? Who are the people that are impacted? I often talk to people that are really into, social justice and prison reform. Have you ever been to a prison? And so have you ever talked to, actually sat and talked to someone that's currently in a correctional facility? And so I think really understanding the issue from a personal level is really key as well, because I think that human-centric approach, that understanding, that personal connection with individuals that are affected that helps to shape a more sustainable solution, and it helps to get that buy-in that's actually going to build that ecosystem that's going to make a difference and actually last. And I think certainly, you know, across the globe, there are a million horror stories of, you know, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars that have gone into projects that look great for a minute, and then they're not sustained 5 years later, and you have, you know, just money wasted. So I think that thinking about that ecosystem approach to bring people in to become that network that creates the sustainability, I think is key. And then I think the other thing that we can't forget is just again, the personal approach of humility and coming into the work with humility and maintaining that humility across the board. And I think that can be, honestly, it can be tricky for those of us that are audacious enough to think that we can change the world. So there's a certain level of confidence that we actually have what it takes to make that change, but then also doing it in a very humble way, I think is also key to, again, building that network as you go that's really going to sustain the work.
Great. Thank you both very much. Let me remind everyone who is observing our program this afternoon that if you have any questions for our panelists, just go ahead and use that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get those addressed before our time runs out. Let's talk a little bit about the current business climate. A lot has obviously changed over the past few months with COVID-19 and with the uncertain economic situation that we're seeing. What types of market disruptions have you both been experiencing? Tom, let me turn to you first. How have you had to change or pivot your business in light of recent events?
Yeah, this has been the 5 craziest months of my life. Not least because my wife and I welcomed our second baby boy into the world in the middle of all of it. But it is not lost on me that probably 80% of business is luck. We are one of few businesses that have been able to really thrive through this crisis, because in the beginning, when grocery store shelves were empty and then Instacart and Amazon lines were long and so on, local farms are open for business. And they were growing food and producing food and harvesting food, and we just happened to deliver it. So we really saw demand just skyrocket through March, April, May. I think there was this initial cohort of customers who were scared to go to the grocery store, and so it was just sort of a convenience move. As time has gone on, though, there are many more who I think whose eyes have been for the first time opened to the injustices and inequities that exist within our food system. Many consumers are experiencing food insecurity for the first time and thinking about it in a different way and wondering what future of our food systems should look like and what their role is as a consumer in helping to build that. So we went from a 20-something person team trying to plug along and scrape at break even and never quite making it to fast forward now, we're 80-something people. We had to spool up to 24 hours, 6 days a week, open a new warehouse. It's really been pretty wild. And that's all on our direct to consumer side of things, where we aggregate from lots of small producers and we deliver to people's homes. On the wholesale side of things, which is our other division, that entire business almost disappeared at the end of March because it was restaurants and school systems and universities, all of which closed. And we didn't know that this spike on the consumer side was coming. So we really just tried to pivot all of the team over the direct to consumer and try to make something of it. But that has now come roaring back with emergency feeding organizations like DC Central Kitchen, for example. They're feeding a tremendous amount of hungry families in our region. They've turned to us as one of their primary supply partners because they recognize the importance of supporting local and regional food systems. And amidst all that, we stood up a new coalition called the Mid-Atlantic Food Resilience and Access Coalition. It's a network of dozens of food system actors here in the region that are really at the neighborhood level, the community level, the block level, It's, you know, Tracy that runs a feeding operation every Tuesday out of the basement of her church because she needs to. It's the network of family volunteers that delivers to homebound seniors in Appalachia and always have, but as the need has skyrocketed, we set up this coalition to be both operational infrastructure to support them, and then we created we did a fundraising effort, and Rachel, you mentioned participatory. We set up a participatory grant making process to deploy micro grants every single Monday to anyone that is sort of checking the 3 boxes of keeping local farmers farming, keeping local food service workers working and paid, and keeping families in need fed right now. And so this coalition it may not be needed, hopefully, as COVID goes away, but it turns out that it's creating new scaffolding and infrastructure that can really be handy in the future as we look at advocating for policy change that can make a more sustainable food network here in the Mid-Atlantic at the end of it. So it's been a busy time.
Very good. Well, before we turn to Rachel, let me, on behalf of the Global Good Fund and all our participants today, congratulate Tom on the birth of his little baby boy. That's always wonderful and exciting news. Rachel, let's talk about the changing market situation in terms of the Global Good Fund. How has the Global Good Fund's work changed in light of recent events, COVID-19, et cetera?
So I think one of the things that hasn't changed, which is an advantage that Global Good Fund had and came into the situation with, is the team has always been a virtual team. And that's something that, you know, has been a huge disruptor for so many organizations, is figuring out how to do things remotely, and, you know, how do you maintain a good culture when you're working virtually, and all of that changes. So I think starting, we actually had a really great foundation in terms of having a great culture within the virtual work environment. So I think that's something that we came into as a strength. And I think that also creates flexibility that, again, a lot of organizations are struggling with, and, you know, being more nimble and being more flexible. And we had that built in to our system already, so coming into it. So I think that was a huge advantage. And from there, able to work very quickly to, again, with that flexibility, to not stick so rigorously to some of our, you know, program protocols. So if, for those that aren't familiar, the Global Good Fund has a number of fellows that we support in the program. Is not just coaching and mentorship, but there are actually some funds that are made available specifically for professional development that's in line with the development plan that the fellows work on with their mentors. So in that case, of course, you know, we have a very rigorous program of, you know, here are the deliverables, here are the things that must be met for the money to be released and all of that. So in that space, we became more flexible. And so we're able to work with the fellows to make sure that they were able to do what they needed to do to keep their organization strong and be more flexible with that funding. And then as well, we raised more money as well to be able to support them further. So I think that was the key part, is, you know, we have our structures in place that we know work well, but being able to be flexible with that in this time. Beyond that, you know, and I guess one of the first things was that we went out and surveyed the fellows in terms of, what do you need? How are you experiencing this? So that was the first piece that both informed the funding. And then also a series of webinars, somewhat similar to this, that we did in conjunction with Motley Fool. And so on all the topics that the fellows were saying, okay, I need to figure out how to do X, Y, and Z, we were able to provide content on that and leadership development on that and open that up to the community. So everyone was able to benefit from that as well. So I think being able to pivot on what was the existing structure, and then also creating new resources and make those available just based on what the needs are. So those are some of the things that I think the team, and kudos to the team, did an amazing job of really moving quickly to meet the needs of our fellows, because that's, you know, first and foremost our goal.
Very good, and thank you. Both of you talked about the absolute requirement for flexibility and adaptability and the ability to pivot when market conditions change. And although the COVID-19 situation was a dramatic change businesses and organizations face change all the time. And so thank you for those comments. Let's talk a little bit more about the Global Good Fund. Rachel, you are a member of the board of directors, and you've also served as an executive mentor for one of our fellows. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience from the perspective of being a mentor? We're going to talk about that toward the end of our program, but tell us about your experience.
So my experience as a mentor, I would say that I'm not sure who got more out of the experience, to be honest. There's something about the Global Good Fund Fellows that just in general, I mean, hearing from Tom, it just makes you question, like, what have I been doing with my life? Because they're just such amazing individuals to just interact with on any level, and inspiring and motivational. So I definitely felt like I was personally enriched just by being able to build this relationship with Gulika Reddy, who is the fellow that I was able to work with. And her organization based in India, they provide human rights curriculum for schools, and they have teachers, and they go and implement that. But she was, dealing with a whole lot of different issues in terms of scaling and different stuff that she had going on. And so it was really just working through some of that and being a sounding board, I would say, and, providing the bits of wisdom that I had here and there, and some, different connections and ways to think about things. But I think overall, the biggest thing in terms of how, just as the mentor, the fellows are so prepared when they come to the mentor relationship, which I think is really important. So, part of the process through the application process, and then working with a leadership development coach and putting together a leadership development plan, it's very clear what the goals are within that mentorship relationship. And I think that's something that, I've done other mentorship programs, and sometimes it's not so clear and people don't know exactly what they're supposed to do or what they're supposed to get out of it or what the goals are. And so it comes almost ready-made in terms of, here it is, and here's what we're working on. And so it's very easy to track the progress in that sense and really see where you're able to add value. So I think that in that sense was really helpful going into it, as well as that, again, I'm constantly shouting out the GGF team because the staff is amazing. And the way that they did the pairing, I think, was perfect. I don't have a background in human rights. So when they first came to me, I thought, okay, explain to me why you think I'm the right mentor for this. And when they actually got into it, and I'm like, okay, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. I don't have to have human rights experience or expertise, because that's not actually what she's working on. That's her area of expertise. There are other issues within scaling the organization and her own professional development that I was, very capable of speaking into. So I think, sometimes with that mentor relationship, there's a hesitation of what am I really bringing to the table? But the team does such a good job of matching, and the fact that it's laid out so well for you, it's almost, that I feel like success is guaranteed in a way. So that was my experience. And so I'm always, ready and waiting for the next time that they call me, because I know it's only going to be when there's a really good match, and not just because they need a body. So I really appreciate that about the program, and would thank you, because I know you've been key in leading that side of GGF effort. But it's an amazing experience. I highly recommend it.
Thanks very much, Rachel. And Tom, let me ask you, from the perspective of a fellow, talk a little bit about your experience and how it pertained or applied or helped you in running your business.
Sure. Yeah. So I was part of a cohort that had both a coach and a mentor, but in many ways the lines were blurred, and that they both became very much mentors and coaches. And I can joke now, like, they were actually very much my therapists. That was the relationship we had. So it started, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier. It was like, it started with helping me to realize, like, they gave me permission to feel comfortable with the identity of being a social entrepreneur, because leading up to that point, sort of trying to fledgle our way through fundraising and the typical venture capital world telling us to fly to Silicon Valley and sell our soul and raise a bunch of capital and off you go. It just wasn't sitting right, but I couldn't find a different way forward. And I was wondering if it was because of that sort of, self-identified desire to be a social entrepreneur and try to tackle some of these complex, hairy social problems. So it started with like the permission to say like, no, that's fine. And you're not alone. And you're now part of this whole network around the world of other people who think the same way. And then that sort of permission evolved over time into confidence. And then sort of confidence evolved over time into leverage. How to use that sort of differentiating factor as exactly that, a differentiating factor, a strategic advantage, becoming clear, sort of taking myself out of my own head and looking at what it was we were building and where we were going, and realizing that it was damn hard, of course, but that's the point. And that's the blue ocean strategy. And it just really, it so charged my batteries to recognize, we were about 4 years in at that point, that we were going somewhere exciting and that we should stay the path and not listen to the Forbes.com of the world to tell me to go to Silicon Valley, right? So that experience then has now parlayed into some of the leadership development that we're doing for our team internally at 4P. We just kicked off a whole strategic planning thing. We're basically copying and pasting a version of the GGF coaching program internally with some of our senior leaders to try to help them be better leaders in their own right. So it has been extremely effective. And the relationships with my coach and my mentor, they certainly did not stop when the program stopped. Far from it. They have become part of our family. In fact, we live now in our coach's house. He rents it to us. This is my coach's house that I'm in. Our baby was born right there in this room. So we have close bonds, and it's been fun to be on this journey with them. And they continue to just give and give and give, and therefore I feel blessed to be able to give it forward.
Very good. Well, thank you for all of your efforts. I'm going back and forth between the Global Good Fund and sustainable change. Before I ask Tom one question, I see that there are a number of questions that have been posted, and we'll get to those questions in just a moment. But Tom, thinking about the food system, I'm a guy that during the COVID-19 would go to the store and not find this or not find that, or couldn't. It was frustrating. What would you tell the individual consumer about what you're trying to do with respect to sustainable food over time?
I would say that our current food system is not working for all stakeholders, and it does so in a way that perpetuates cycles of poverty, inequity, racial wealth gaps, such that those who are in power stay in power. And it just comes to food in this weird way. But food is this great equalizer, or can be, if we change the underpinning of the systems that make that be true. I might not say all of this because like an average consumer might say, what are you talking about? But what I would say in a more succinct way is that our food system is broken, and it's killing our planet, it's killing our communities, and it's killing our children in many ways. We are one of the most unhealthy countries on the planet, and it's getting worse with every new generation. And it's because of a complex network of broken systems. That's the bad news. The good news is you, consumer, can do something about it. There is an alternative, and you can engage in a more equitable, more sustainable, more regenerative, more local, more regional, more seasonal food system. And in fact, it's just as convenient, and there is a way to do something about it. So, and then I would probably put some shameless plug about 4P Foods, but if they don't live around here, it'd be a shameless plug for their equivalent of 4P. Our company, there's versions of us all over the country, all over the world. You just got to do a little digging and got to say no to Amazon and dig a little deeper, because we're out there.
That's not a shameless plug at all, Tom. We appreciate what you're doing very, very much. Uh, I see some questions from folks who are observing our program today, and I think it's time for me to turn it back over to Danielle to uh, bring up some of those questions from our audience. Danielle?
Yes, thank you so much. A few questions, and again, don't be shy. I know this is not a shy group, but head over to the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen and type in your questions. We'll get to as many as we can. The first one is actually for both Rachel and Tom. What are your suggestions for individuals who have started a business because of COVID-19 to sustain long-term growth?
I'll jump in real quickly. I think there's, it's a pretty broad question, and there are a lot of things that you would have to think about in terms of what is the actual business, right? And is there a market for the business beyond the COVID environment? But that being said, I think COVID has created this space for people to think about and launch new ventures that they may not have otherwise thought about or had the opportunity, whether it's been forced on you or not, and had the opportunity to take on. So I would definitely take it very seriously to see if this is something that really can continue. And I think looking at what are those resources, whether it's small business resources or fellowship programs or boot camps, or the different things that might be out there that can help create a support system and create a network. And even Global Good Fund has services that even if you're not a fellow, you can actually sign up and get services from the Global Good Fund. So I think there are a lot of resources out there that if you want to sustain and scale your business beyond the COVID-19 environment, I would say look for those support structures so you can really fortify the business now to be in a position to think long-term and scale and grow.
Yeah, I echo everything Rachel just said. I would add, and we're dealing with this currently with this new coalition that I mentioned we stood up, which is like, it was supposed to be temporary because COVID was supposed to be temporary. But now we're seeing this new value in having new connections in the food system that weren't there before that could and should be long lasting. And so I think there's this dichotomy between, I started a business that's addressing the crisis right now, and so when the crisis goes away, the business model might not make sense. I think there's an opportunity to look at it slightly differently in that, like, we started a business to address this crisis because before the crisis, there was this underpinning of brokenness. There was some sort of missed opportunity, some sort of something that created this as a crisis need right now. And so we can either go back to normal, at which point that underpinning, that painful reality for some stakeholders will go back to the way it was. And so our business is focused on, when COVID does go away, making sure that this base problem is no longer a problem, and here's our business solution. And what we've experienced a little bit is that people that are in positions of power, be them funders or policymakers or various stakeholders, like, nobody knows what to do right now. So I've found it helpful to say, like, here, person in power, here's a 2-pager about how we can have a new food system coming out the tail end of it, so that it's not these USDA models that are like top-down design, but rather stakeholder-driven bottom-up design, so that we don't have hunger and we don't have inequitable food systems, that we go back to normal when normal arrives, because nobody wants that because it wasn't working before. So presenting solutions to people that can be allies and partners, and just sort of leading the way on that, even if you're not totally sure of how you're going to do it all, seems to be a welcomed dialogue. At least that's been our experience so far with food and here in the region.
Great, thank you both. For this next question, let's take it back over to Rachel. How can private companies best partner with social enterprises to create lasting impact and change? It's also a bit of a broad question, but we'll start with you and we're going to take it down the line.
So that is pretty broad, but I will say, in a lot of ways, this is the perfect time to be thinking about that and to do it. So just to take a bit of a step back in, even the pre-COVID world, you see trends within business to be forces for good, or good corporate citizens. You see from an investor perspective more pressure from investors like BlackRock in talking about the purpose of business, and you have the business roundtable talking about it's more than just responsibility to shareholders but broader stakeholders. So there's this trend both from investors that are looking at ESG issues, the environmental social governance issues, to HR departments that are thinking about how do we recruit and retain the best people, and it's about having a company that values aligns with the people that we're trying to attract, to consumers that are very much more savvy about what's where am I buying, what I'm buying. There's some debate about how much more money they'll pay for something that's sustainable or not, but there's certainly that trend and that pressure. So there's CSR, corporate social responsibility, for a long time. I'll just think, to put it bluntly, it was kind of lipstick on the pig, right? Like, it was a PR stunt in a lot of ways. It was just like the very bare minimum license to operate in a community. So people think we're a good company, but we do whatever else we want to do on the side. But that's shifting, and the trend is for that to become much more authentic, much more built into the DNA. So you have a company like 4P Foods and a lot of social enterprises that are what we call born social. And that's, they were founded on the idea of solving a social problem, doing social good from a business perspective. I think a lot of the big companies are coming at it, they weren't born social, and now they're trying to build it in. And having worked with some, large multi-billion-dollar companies that are trying to figure this out, they're always looking for what's the white space. And so, now it's almost like this race to, I'm going to say race to the top, about who's doing the best in terms of social impact. So setting the goals and reporting out on them. I think something like, last I checked, 80-something% of Russell 1000 companies are reporting out on they're doing CSR reports, and annual or biannual CSR reports. And so within those, they're always thinking about how do we stand out? How do we build brand loyalty within this space of doing social good? So I think that there's an opportunity, and I think something that's very interesting for companies to think about is partnering with social entrepreneurs to accomplish some of those impact goals that they've set out. So, if you look at a company's CSR report or ESG report, whatever they happen to call it, they typically will have impact goals that they're trying to achieve. So I think a potential strategy for a social entrepreneur is to look at what those are and see where there's alignment, because partnering with the social entrepreneur could be a very interesting way to approach impact versus what's been the traditional, we make a donation to the local nonprofit and we keep it moving. So I think there's a lot of ways to get creative, especially with some of the larger companies that they were looking to be more creative about what they're doing and how they approach their corporate social responsibility. So I think there's opportunities there, and it goes across the board, whether it's thinking about volunteer opportunities for their employees from an employee engagement perspective, to looking at their supply chain and how they're addressing supply chain issues, to all of the environmental things. So I think there's a space where you can really capitalize on that trend of companies having to kind of put their money where their mouth is when it comes to corporate social responsibility.
Great, thank you. Tom, how would you respond to this, being on the other side?
Yeah, I would say that plus one to everything Rachel said. Again, we didn't plan this, but we're doing a good job riffing back and forth on each other. A thing I think I would add, especially to those on the call that are social entrepreneurs and leaders and stakeholders in their respective communities, is to continue to, in whatever way possible, hold those bigger companies with more resources, hold them to the fire, because I fear that this movement has the potential to be hijacked by those in power, those who have a tremendous amount of money, to do just enough to have just a shiny enough corporate social responsibility report to stay in power, to continue to marginalize and externalize onto others. Right? There's a conscious capitalism. When John Mackey and his friends printed and published that, it was thought to be a wonderful sort of way forward for business, and it is in some instances, but it's also not in many others. Like Whole Foods employees can't unionize, and now it's owned by Amazon, and like there are things that allow the lipstick on the proverbial pig that Rachel alluded to have eyegloss added and call it enough. And I worry that falls far short of the true systems change that's needed at a global level. Here in America, for example, there's a lot of big corporations talking now after George Floyd was murdered about their racial equity and inclusion programs. And that's all well and good, but if they're not doing that in the same voice of also talking about reparations and the 400 years of history and what their role is in that in terms of where their wealth and power came from, I worry about that eyegloss being just enough to move half a step forward, but not the 10 steps forward that we need to. So in whatever power that you have in your community as a stakeholder, yes, partnering with private companies to help them see these things, but then also help them do these things is where I think a lot of roles of smaller organizations and social entrepreneurs can really be helpful.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that response. What I actually would like to get your perspective on this. I know you are talking to a lot of the mentors when they, the business mentors, when they are coming into the network. You are one having the initial conversation with them. Do these topics come up? Are they asking about these things? Is that part of the, I don't want to say prerequisite, but we have these companies that we are going to be partnering you with, these individuals who are looking to have a lasting social impact. And what's on the other, how do those conversations go? And can you kind of give us an inside peek, pull behind the curtain a little bit and let us know?
Sure. Well, I think that when we at the Global Good Fund describe our need for executive mentors of young social entrepreneurs who are running organizations with a high social impact, that touches many of the people that we're talking about. People want to have that high social impact. People want to be helping other people. People want to help young social entrepreneurs that are trying to do this in their respective areas of focus. So we talk quite a bit about that impact that we're trying to achieve, and we emphasize the fact that we're trying to do it by enhancing or improving the leadership capability of the fellows that we select. And any executive who is thinking about being a mentor knows the importance of leadership development. They've had to do it in their respective organizations. They're doing it today, not only in their organizations, but in their churches, in their families, in their neighborhoods. And so it starts to come together for people and they want to help. So yes, we talk about these issues. And one of the things that potential mentors always ask me, I'm not sure I've got what it takes. I'm not sure I have the experience to help these outstanding social entrepreneurs and these people that are doing such marvelous, incredible work. And I assure them that we're talking not about sophisticated algorithms or sophisticated financial plans. We're talking about leadership development. That's what we all need as we grow and as we mature in our businesses or in our different areas of initiatives. But they know leadership and they know the importance of leadership development, and they know that they can mentor someone to help them in that leadership development. The Global Good Fund, I think, as most of the people on this call know, has a process in which we help the fellows develop a leadership development plan that provides a structure for that leadership development for the individual fellow. So I hope I'm responding to your question, Danielle, that yes, we talk about social impact and how the Global Good Fund through its fellows can achieve that.
Thank you. Looking at the time, I'm going to turn things back over to Wood for to wrap up the conversation portion of this program before we head over to next steps. Wood, floor is yours.
Very good. Let me ask Tom and Rachel, first of all, thanking Tom and Rachel for their participation and their outstanding comments and discussion today. But I would invite each of you to just give us some of your final thoughts on this topic of entrepreneurs as social change agents, or just generally change agents. Rachel, can we turn to you first?
Sure. So very high level, I'm just going to share a couple things that I've been thinking about recently. You know, a lot of social science that kind of informs a lot of what we do was founded on Newtonian physics, and, you know, this moves that and force. And I've been digging into quantum physics lately. And the idea, you know, and really digging into the idea that, one, we're all connected at the very fundamental level. So to Tom's point, thinking about, you know, how are we all connected? And what does that look like as we emerge from this season where we've realized, and I think it's become more glaring to some people that weren't as aware of the just horrible disparities that exist in our society that is so wealthy in so many ways. So I think thinking about that connectedness, and I think that there is certainly a power that entrepreneurs harness in pushing things forward. So thinking about doing that in a sense of the whole and the connectedness. I think there's a lot of potential and power in that. And again, in the quantum space, thinking about how everything is entangled, right? So what we do in one space affects what's going on in a different space. And I think that the more we're conscious and aware of that as we move forward in the endeavors that, you know, the things that we're taking on to have, so, you know, a social impact, I just think that's really important. And the idea that, you know, this goes back to, you know, when we think about economics, was really founded on the notion of scarcity. And I think that, and it's just something that I'm grappling with. So I'm just asking everybody to bear with me. I'm having a moment. But the idea that it was founded on a notion of scarcity. And if we changed our mindset, that it wasn't about scarcity, that it was about an ever-expanding universe. And if we're thinking about it in that way, how do we solve problems not from a position of scarcity, but of a position of an ever-expanding connected space? What could that look like? So to me, when I'm thinking about social change and something, and I apologize for, I mean, I'm sure you weren't looking for a philosophical diatribe, but for me, when I think about social change, and what I'd encourage everyone to think about is really thinking about how are we all connected? And if we think about things from a point of expansion and not scarcity, how does that change what we do? How does that change what we might be willing to give up for someone else? So when you're thinking about, especially in the, you know, in the conversation of diversity, equity, and inclusion and challenging power structures, when you challenge power structures, someone loses some power in that challenge. So I think there are a lot of things going on in society right now, and we're in an amazing position to move forward in a very significant way. And so I hope, to Tom's point, we don't lose that momentum and think about it in a very broad, a very broad way of what's possible. So I'll just leave it at that. I think social change fundamentally is recognizing where we are. We're all connected. It's not about scarcity, it's about what's possible.
Very good. Tom, I won't ask you about quantum mechanics or quantum physics, but could you briefly give us some final thoughts on entrepreneurs as change agents?
I think if nothing else, Rachel and I may have become best friends through this call, because I too have been geeking out on quantum mechanics, and specifically epidemiology through like neuroscience, and how our brains are wired to potentially change the way that they operate in terms of the way that we perceive the world. And with perception being reality, those two buckets of change can either come from practice in the form of meditation and or exercising, and or oftentimes that helps to fire different parts of our brains that make us realize that we are part of a bigger whole. and or a significant event, be it a beautiful one like the birth of a child or a traumatic one like a global pandemic. I think that there is both of these things happening around the world right now, some good, some bad, but I would say that as far as entrepreneurs as social change agents, the time is now. There may never be another time like this in our lifetime to, if you have an idea or a passion to do a thing or double down on your thing or grow your thing, like the world needs you. And to all of the potential mentors and coaches on the call, like the world needs them, and they need the professional leadership development to step into that role, because as Rachel just said, like we are all connected, and there's a way to use business to do something about that and leverage that for a greater good.
Very good. The need is great, as we all know, and like you implied, Tom, if not now, when? But let me, on behalf of our participants in the Global Good Fund, thank Tom and Rachel for their time this afternoon, for their excellent comments and very thought-provoking discussion about change and about what the Global Good Fund is doing. Thank you both very, very much. Our time is running short, and for our folks that are observing today, if you have another question or if there's something that is still burning in your brain, feel free to drop Rachel or me an email with that question, and we'll do our best to respond either through Tom and Rachel or someone else. Our program today called for me to talk a little bit about executive mentors for the Global Good Fund. I'm sensitive to the time, and so I'll try to be succinct. Rachel and I both talked about mentors during the program, and like Rachel, I've served as a mentor, and I'm confident when I say that I got as much out of it, if not more, than the person I was trying to mentor. The reason the Global Good Fund formed this BEC, the Business Executive Community, was to help us in recruiting executive mentors. We're always trying to recruit mentors, and we want mentors to be as diverse and have the diverse experience as our fellows do. And we just always need more mentors because we want to ensure that when we match a mentor with a fellow, that we have enough mentors from which to choose to achieve that very, very good match. One thing that we have also, another reason that we have formed this BEC is that as we recruit mentors and we go through that matching process with the fellows, there are executive mentors who we do not match with a fellow, and we form the BEC as a means to continue to have contact with the mentors, even if they're not currently matched with a fellow, because we need to continuously recruit those diverse executives. Remember that in the Global Good Fund, our hope is to have executives, CEOs, former CEOs, COOs, former COOs, who are willing to give of some of their time to help our fellows implement those leadership development plans that I alluded to, and to provide that other set of eyes and that experience to help them think through the inevitable challenges they have in running their respective organizations. I could go on, obviously, but I'm looking at Nikki's big hand here, and I need to turn it back over to Danielle for her wrap up and housekeeping items. Danielle?
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you, Wood, Tom, Rachel. This was fantastic. I had my camera turned off, but I was smiling from ear to ear. Whether it's quantum physics, epidemiology, no matter what it is, please, I could listen to you both talk for so much longer. But we do want to keep this to an hour. Luckily, I spent a lot of time in New York, so I can talk fast. So I'll make sure we're out of here by 1 o'clock. I know many of you are joining us on your lunch break. So a few quick things. As you close out of today's program, you are going to get a feedback survey. Please fill it out. It is incredibly helpful to us as we plan additional programs. We want our future programs to be for you in topics that are relevant to you. please fill us out, let us know what you're interested in, and we will make it happen. Additionally, we are looking for BEC volunteers to help with our search and selection process for 2021. If you are interested, please let me know. You'll get in the follow-up email, as well as we are looking for a few more mentors. So if you are inspired by Rachel and you want to get more engaged, our LEAP program, we are currently recruiting mentors for that program right now, and I will circulate additional details for that as well. And then finally, I just want to end and conclude with a thank you to all of our participants. It is the BEC that makes the work of the Global Good Fund possible. You are the ones who are working with our fellows. You are the ones who are invested in our work. You are our leadership. You are our board members. And without you, this would not be possible. So I want to thank you for engaging. I want to thank you for giving your time, your resource, your talents to help us address these issues in the world's most complex social problems, because you're the ones that are going to allow us to deliver on that mission. So thank you. And while this is the conclusion of our three-part BE community conversation, it is not the conclusion of this community or any or these conversations. So stay tuned for more. Thank you for engaging, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks all.
Thanks for having us. Take care, everyone.